Imagine walking into your own mall, just casually strolling around in a Make America Great Again hat. Nobody knows you're the owner. Then here comes the manager, the guy who clearly thinks he's the king of the place, storming over and demanding you take off the hat or leave his property. He calls security, makes a scene in the food court, and people start filming everything on their phones. Now, picture his face when I pull out my business card that says owner of the mall. Trust me, that was just the beginning. My name is Adam. I'm 42 years old, and last week I found myself living through the kind of situation that feels straight out of a sitcom, or maybe a courtroom drama. Let me set the stage for you. I'd recently closed a massive deal, buying up this local mall, a nostalgic place, the kind where you'd hang out as a teenager just for the pretzels and bad decisions. It was my biggest investment yet, and instead of announcing myself as the new boss, I decided to go undercover. You know, like those shows where the CEO pretends to be a janitor. Only I wasn't scrubbing floors, I was just another guy wandering around in jeans, a hoodie, and my trusty baseball cap. Now, about the hat, it's my go-to accessory. Comfortable, worn in, and honestly, it's just a hat. But people have opinions, apparently. I didn't think much of it as I walked through the mall, sipping my overpriced coffee, scoping out the place like I was on a mission. Families with strollers were bustling around. A pack of teenagers giggled by the fountain, and a guy in a questionable superhero costume handed out flyers for some gym membership promo. Everything seemed normal. Until it wasn't. That's when he showed up. Todd, the mall manager. Now, let me paint you a picture. Todd is tall, but somehow manages to still look small. He's got that wiry build and a face that's permanently set to mildly annoyed. His suit? A little too shiny, like he'd picked it up on sale and thought, this screams authority. Spoiler, it didn't. From the moment Todd locked eyes on me, I could tell I was in trouble. His gaze zeroed in on my hat like it was some kind of personal insult, and before I could take another sip of my coffee, he was striding toward me with all the grace of a shopping cart with a bad wheel. "Excuse me, sir," Todd started, his voice dripping with the kind of fake politeness that tells you he's about to ruin your day. "We have a strict policy in this mall." I blinked, unsure where this was going. "Okay, and?" "That hat," Todd said, pointing as if I wasn't already aware of what was on my own head, "is against mall rules." It's a hat," I replied, taking another sip of coffee. I mean, seriously, was this guy for real? Todd's face turned a shade of red that could rival the food court's ketchup dispenser. "It's offensive. We have a zero-tolerance policy for political attire. Now, let me tell you, I've seen some wild outfits in my day. Just down the hall, I'd passed a guy wearing neon green Crocs and socks pulled up to his knees, and no one seemed to have an issue with that. But my hat? Apparently, it was mall enemy number one." "Offensive?" I repeated, glancing around. "You've got a guy over there wearing a shirt that says, 'Tacos are life.' And I'm the problem?" Todd didn't even flinch. "You either take it off or you leave. Those are your options." I looked at him, trying to decide if this was a prank or if he was genuinely this serious. "So let me get this straight. You're kicking me out over a hat?" "That's exactly what I'm doing," Todd said, crossing his arms like he just won a prize for most annoying manager of the year. Now, I could feel a small crowd forming. People were starting to notice the commotion, whispering to each other while sneaking glances in our direction. A mom with a stroller stopped mid-stride, her toddler dangling a churro like it was a sword. A group of teenagers by the smoothie stand were filming the scene, probably hoping to catch something viral-worthy. I wasn't about to back down. Not yet, anyway. "Look, I'm just here for a coffee and a walk," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not bothering anyone." "That hat," Todd said, practically spitting the words, "is bothering me. So you're going to take it off or you're going to leave." At this point, I couldn't help but chuckle. The absurdity of the situation was starting to sink in. "You're really serious about this, huh?" "Dead serious," Todd replied, his expression as smug as a cat that just knocked over a vase. "And if you refuse, I'll call security." Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't trying to start a scene, but something about Todd's tone, the way he puffed up his chest, like he was the king of this food court, made me want to dig my heels in. "Well, Todd," I said, pulling off the hat and holding it in my hand, "there, happy now?" "No," he snapped. "I want you off the property immediately." "Off the property?" My laugh echoed through the food court, catching the attention of even more onlookers. "You're kicking me out for existing?" Todd didn't respond. He just waved over two security guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. One of them hesitated before approaching, muttering something to the other under his breath. Probably something along the lines of, "This guy again?" The crowd was fully invested now, whispering, pointing, and, of course, filming. The teenagers by the smoothie stand were practically vibrating with excitement. And me? I was just trying to decide if Todd was worth the energy, but one thing was clear, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. So there I was, standing in the middle of the food court, holding my coffee in one hand and my hat in the other, thinking this whole thing had to be a bad joke. But Todd? Oh no, Todd was as serious as a heart attack. His face looked like he'd just won a game of mall manager bingo, and kicking me out was the grand prize. "Fine," I said, slipping the hat into my pocket. "There, problem solved, right?" Todd's smirk didn't budge. "Not even close," he spat, his voice dripping with self-importance. "You're still trespassing." I blinked. "Trespassing? I just paid $6 for this coffee. Doesn't that make me a customer?" "Doesn't matter," Todd shot back, crossing his arms like he just delivered the ultimate mic drop. "I want you off the property. Now." Now, here's the thing about me. I'm not exactly the kind of guy who backs down easily. But Todd, this guy had a whole different energy. He was like a middle school hall monitor who finally got a taste of power and decided to go full dictator. And the worst part? People were starting to notice. The food court had gone from bustling to buzzing. Phones were out, cameras rolling. A woman with a stroller leaned over to her friend and muttered, "Isn't that like against his rights or something?" Another guy in line for pretzels whispered, "This is going to blow up online." But Todd was too busy basking in his self-appointed hero moment to realize he was starring in a viral video. "Security!" he bellowed, waving his arms like he was directing a traffic. Two mall guards, clearly not thrilled to be part of the circus, started making their way over. They looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. One of them even stopped to adjust his belt, probably stalling for time. When they finally reached us, Todd pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal mastermind. "Escort this man out," he barked. "He's violating mall policy." The guards exchanged a quick glance, clearly unsure about the whole situation. One of them, a younger guy with a buzz cut, hesitated before speaking. What exactly did he do?" Todd's face turned a new shade of red. "I already told you. He's causing a disturbance and refusing to leave." "Disturbance?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "I'm holding a coffee, not starting a flash mob." Buzzcut looked at me, then at Todd, and you could tell he wasn't buying it. But before he could say anything, Todd snapped, "Are you going to do your job, or do I need to call your supervisor?" That was enough to get them moving. Reluctantly, Buzzcut and his partner stepped forward. "Sorry, man," Buzzcut mumbled, barely meeting my eyes. "We just have to follow orders." I sighed, raising my hands in mock surrender. "Yeah, I get it. Gotta keep the boss happy, right?" "Something like that," he muttered, clearly uncomfortable. As they took me by the arm and started walking me toward the exit, the whispers around us turned into full-blown chatter. People were filming from every angle, and I could hear snippets of their commentary. Is he really getting kicked out over a hat? This is so messed up. I hope he sues. Meanwhile, Todd followed behind us like a triumphant king, his voice echoing through the food court. "And don't come back," he shouted, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. Now, I could have kept walking. I could have let them escort me out quietly and save myself the hassle. But where's the fun in that? I stopped dead in my tracks, turning to face Todd one last time. "You're making a huge mistake," I said, my voice calm but firm. Todd crossed his arms, his smirk widening. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can do whatever you want." Buzzcut and his partner froze, clearly unsure whether to keep moving or let me finish. The crowd, now fully invested, went silent. Phones still pointed in our direction. I took a step closer to Todd, keeping my eyes locked on his. "You think you've got all the power, huh? You think you're untouchable?" Todd opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "Here's the thing about power. It's a lot more fragile than you think." For a split second, Todd's smirk faltered. But then he recovered, waving me off with a dismissive hand. "Whatever, just get out." The guards gently tugged at my arms, signaling it was time to go. I let them lead me toward the exit, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Todd might have thought he'd won, but little did he know, this wasn't over. As we passed through the sliding doors, I turned to Buzzcut and said, "Hey, no hard feelings. Just remember this moment when things get interesting." He gave me a puzzled look, but before he could respond, the doors closed behind us. The crowd inside was still buzzing, and Todd? Well, Todd had no idea he'd just kicked out his new boss. I sat in my car, the parking lot bathed in the warm glow of the mall's neon sign. My coffee sat in the cup holder, now lukewarm, but I didn't care. The whole situation with Todd was running through my head on repeat, and the more I thought about it, the funnier it got. His smug face, the crowd, the way he strutted around like he owned the place. Spoiler alert, he didn't. That was my mall. I couldn't help but chuckle. The sheer arrogance of the guy was almost impressive. Almost. But if Todd thought that was the end of it, he was in for a surprise. I wasn't the kind of guy to let something like this slide. Not out of pride, okay, maybe a little pride, but mostly because watching this unfold was going to be way more entertaining than Netflix. Grinning to myself, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Vanessa's number. Vanessa was my lawyer, and let me tell you, she didn't just play the game, she rewrote the rules. If Todd was a wannabe mall cop, Vanessa was the FBI. She picked up on the second ring. "Adam," she said, her voice as sharp as ever. "What's going on?" "You're not going to believe this," I began, launching into the whole story. I told her about Todd, the hat, the security guards, and the crowd with their phones out. By the time I was done, I could hear her trying not to laugh. "Wait," she said, clearly amused. "He kicked you out of your own mall? That's a new one." "Right. I mean, the guy's got guts. I'll give him that," I said. "But he also has no idea who he's messing with." Vanessa's tone shifted, her professional side kicking in. "You want me to draft a formal notice? Maybe have a little chat with him about workplace conduct?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "Not yet. Let's not tip our hand. I want to see how far this guy is willing to go. Let's keep things quiet for now." She chuckled. "You're playing the long game. I like it. Just let me know when you're ready to make your move." "Oh, you'll be the first to know," I promised, before hanging up. Leaning back in my seat, I stared out the windshield at the mall. Todd didn't just embarrass me. He embarrassed himself, the staff, and anyone unlucky enough to work under him. And the thing about people like Todd, they never know when to stop. I had no doubt he'd dig himself an even deeper hole. My job was to stand back and let him. But just standing back, that wasn't my style. If I was going to confront Todd again, I needed to make a statement. No more hoodie and jeans. This time, I'd go in dressed like the owner I was. And maybe, just maybe, I'd wear the hat again. For fun. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Todd had thrown the first punch, figuratively speaking, but today, I was throwing it right back. I pulled out my sharpest tailored suit, polished my shoes until they could double as mirrors, and for the piece de resistance, I grabbed the hat. Yep, the same one. If Todd thought he could intimidate me, he was about to get the reality check of his life. Walking into the mall felt different this time. The air practically buzzed with anticipation. Not that anyone knew who I was, but the way I carried myself, let's just say I wasn't blending in anymore. Heads turned as I strode through the entrance, my shoes clicking against the polished floors. A group of teenagers by the fountain stopped mid-laugh to stare. One of them even nudged his friend and said, "Dude, is he famous?" "Not famous, kid. Just here to make an impression." I wasn't 2 steps past the food court when Todd appeared, like a heat-seeking missile. His expression was a mix of irritation and confusion, probably wondering why I had the audacity to show my face again. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. He stormed over, his polished shoes squeaking with every step. Honestly, it was kind of hard not to laugh. "I thought I made myself clear yesterday," he hissed, his tone dripping with faux authority. I tilted my head, giving him the calmest smile I could muster. "You did," I replied smoothly, "but I decided to come back." Todd's face turned a shade of purple I didn't know was possible. "You're trespassing," he spat, pointing a finger at me like I just robbed a bank. "Again." "Am I?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because last I checked, this mall is open to the public." "Not to you," he snapped, his voice rising loud enough to draw attention from the nearby shoppers. People were already slowing down, curious about the commotion. Phones were coming out, again. Todd didn't seem to notice. He was too busy trying to assert his dominance. "Security!" he barked, waving his hand like he was summoning backup in an action movie. "Get over here!" This time, I didn't wait for the guards. As Todd fumed, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. "Before you make another mistake," I said, holding it out to him, "you might want to read this." Todd snatched the card, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at it. His lips moved as he read the words out loud, almost as if he couldn't believe them. Adam Carter, owner, Westside Mall. The moment it registered, his face went pale, like all the blood had drained out at once. "This," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "This some kind of joke?" "Nope," I said, grinning. "Welcome to reality, Todd." The crowd around us had grown, and the whispers were getting louder. Someone in the back said, "Wait, he owns the mall?" Another person muttered, "This is better than TV." Todd's eyes darted from the card to my face, then back to the card. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something, but no words came out. For once, he was speechless. It was almost refreshing. "So," I said, slipping the card back into my pocket, "about that policy of yours. Care to explain it to me? Because I'm really curious how you plan to enforce it. On me." Todd swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling before my eyes. I didn't know," he mumbled, his voice shaking. "No, you didn't," I said, my tone sharp enough to cut through steel. "And maybe next time you'll think twice before throwing your weight around. But for now, Todd, we need to have a chat about your future here." His eyes widened in panic, and I could practically see the gears turning in his head. The crowd was still watching, phones pointed at us like we were the main event. I turned to the onlookers, gave them a little nod, and said, "Enjoy your shopping, folks." And just like that, I walked off, leaving Todd standing there with the weight of reality crashing down on him. This wasn't over. Oh no, this was just the beginning. If there was a textbook example of a meltdown, Todd was living it in real time. The guy looked like he'd just realized he left the oven on while his house was full of fireworks. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, and the sweat on his brow was shining under the food court lights. Honestly, it was almost impressive how fast his confidence had crumbled. I didn't know," he sputtered, his voice cracking as he gestured wildly. "You weren't on the schedule. No one told me." "That's the point, Todd," I said, cutting him off mid-excuse. My tone was calm, but the edge in my voice made him flinch. "I wanted to see how this place runs without the staff knowing who I am. And let me tell you," I paused, letting the tension build. "I'm not impressed." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Again. It was like every time Todd opened his mouth, he created his own fan club of onlookers, waiting to see how badly he'd screw up next. Phones were out, recording every second. Somewhere in the back, I heard someone whisper, "This is gold." The two security guards were still standing there, frozen like statues. One of them, the younger guy from yesterday, finally found his voice. "Wait, you're the new owner?" "That's right," I said, not breaking eye contact with Todd. And we need to have a serious conversation about your attitude." Todd's eyes darted around like he was searching for a trapdoor to fall through. "Look," he stammered, his hands raised defensively, "this is all a misunderstanding." "No," I said, cutting him off again, my voice firm enough to make a nearby shopper gasp. "This isn't a misunderstanding, Todd. This is a problem. And now, it's your problem." The crowd around us grew even quieter, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Todd's face had gone from purple to pale, his earlier bravado replaced with the realization that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. He tried again, his voice shaky. I didn't mean any harm. I was just following protocol." "Protocol?" I raised an eyebrow, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what you call kicking out paying customers? Humiliating people in front of a crowd? Because if that's your version of protocol, we've got bigger issues than I thought." Todd swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like a nervous metronome. The security guards exchanged glances, clearly trying to decide whether to step in or just let this play out. Spoiler, they chose the smart option. Stay quiet and watch the show. The crowd, meanwhile, was eating this up like it was the season finale of their favorite drama. A woman with a stroller leaned over to her friend and whispered, I can't believe he's the owner. Another guy, clutching a smoothie, said loud enough for everyone to hear, Todd's done for. Todd, to his credit, tried one last Hail Mary. Maybe we can work this out, he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. I mean, we're all on the same team, right? I stared at him for a long moment, letting the silence hang in the air. Finally, I leaned in just enough to make him squirm. Todd, I said slowly, the only team you're on right now is Team Damage Control. And let me tell you, you're not exactly winning. His forced smile faltered, and I could see the panic fully set in. He knew there was no easy way out of this. And honestly, watching him squirm was more satisfying than I expected. Turning to the crowd, I gave them a polite nod. Thanks for your patience, everyone, I said, loud enough to be heard over the murmurs. I promise, changes are coming. The onlookers started to disperse, though a few lingered, clearly hoping for more drama. Todd, meanwhile, stood rooted to the spot, his hands clenched at his sides. I glanced at the security guards and said, You two can head back to your posts. I'll take it from here. They didn't need to be told twice. As they walked away, I turned back to Todd, my smile fading. Let's go to your office, I said. We've got a lot to discuss. And with that, Todd shuffled off toward the back hallway, his shoulders slumped in defeat. This was far from over, and he knew it. The next day, it was time to peel back the layers of Todd's so-called management. After the public fiasco in the food court, I wasn't just annoyed, I was curious. What kind of chaos was this guy running behind the scenes? I sent out an email first thing in the morning, calling for a mandatory staff meeting. Attendance wasn't optional, and yes, that included Todd. When I arrived at the conference room, the air was thick with tension. Employees shuffled in quietly, some avoiding eye contact, while others exchanged nervous glances. It was clear they knew something was up, but no one dared say it out loud. Meanwhile, Todd sat in the corner, arms crossed, trying to maintain an air of confidence. Spoiler alert, it wasn't working. His tie was slightly askew, and there was a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. The guy was unraveling, and we hadn't even started yet. I stood at the head of the table, letting the silence settle before speaking. Good morning, everyone, I began, keeping my tone calm but firm. As you all know, I'm Adam Carter, the new owner of this mall, and after what I witnessed yesterday, I realized it's time to get to the bottom of how things are being run here. Cue the side glances and a few audible gulps. Todd shifted in his seat, his bravado cracking just a little more. We're going to have an open discussion, I continued. No judgment, no repercussions, unless, of course, it's deserved. My eyes flicked briefly to Todd, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I want to hear about your experiences working here, the good, the bad, and everything in between. At first, there was an awkward silence. People exchanged hesitant looks, clearly unsure if they should speak up. Finally, one brave soul, a young woman from the customer service desk, raised her hand. Well, she started, her voice shaky but determined. It's kind of hard to know where to begin. Todd, he plays favorites, like big time. If you're not in his circle, you get stuck with the worst shifts. Another employee chimed in, a guy from the maintenance crew. Yeah, and those shifts always seem to line up with when he takes off early. Funny how that works, huh? The floodgates opened. One by one, employees shared their stories, unfair scheduling, ignored requests for time off, and even accusations that Todd had taken credit for their ideas. Then came the kicker. There's also the vendor fees, said a woman from accounting. Her tone was careful, like she was walking a tightrope. We've noticed some discrepancies. Payments from certain vendors don't match what's recorded in the system. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Todd, whose face was now a shade of crimson I didn't think was possible. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. It was almost impressive how fast his confidence had evaporated. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. Is this true? I asked, my voice steady but sharp. Todd stammered, his words tumbling over each other. They're exaggerating. I mean, maybe there were a few minor errors, but it's not like... Enough, I said, cutting him off. The room fell silent again, the tension so thick you could have cut it with a knife. This isn't just about a few mistakes, Todd. This is about a pattern of behavior that's unacceptable, both for this mall and for the people who work here. He started to protest, his voice shaking. "But, no buts," I said firmly, holding up a hand to stop him. "You're suspended pending an internal investigation. Hand over your keys." For a moment, Todd just sat there, frozen. It was like he couldn't believe what was happening. You can't be serious," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I'm very serious," I replied. "This isn't up for debate. Pack up your things." Todd's jaw dropped, but he didn't argue further. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys, placing them on the table with a shaky hand. The room was silent as I picked them up and slid them into my pocket. "Thank you," I said, turning to the rest of the staff. "Now, let's focus on moving forward. If anyone has additional concerns or evidence, you can speak with me directly after the meeting. My door is always open." With that, the meeting was adjourned. As the employees filed out, there was a palpable sense of relief in the air. Todd, meanwhile, slinked out like a defeated dog, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Watching him walk away, I couldn't help but think, this wasn't just about cleaning house. It was about setting a new standard. And Todd? He was just the beginning. With Todd out of the picture, it was time to roll up my sleeves and give this mall the glow-up it desperately needed. The guy had run the place like it was his personal fiefdom, but those days, long gone. Now, it was about making the mall a place where both employees and customers actually wanted to be. Not just a spot where you tolerated overpriced coffee and awkward escalator rides, the first order of business, bringing in a new management team. I wasn't messing around. I needed people who knew what they were doing. Folks who could handle the chaos of retail without turning it into a power trip. After a week of interviews and background checks, I had a dream team in place, a no-nonsense operations manager, a marketing wizard who could sell ice to a snowman, and a customer service lead who somehow managed to be both kind and terrifyingly efficient. Once the team was set, we dove into the nitty-gritty. Policies were reviewed, rewritten, and rolled out. No more favoritism shifts or vague rules that Todd used as weapons. Instead, we focused on fairness and transparency. Scheduling became a collaborative process. Vendors were reassured that their fees weren't going into anyone's pocket, and I personally made sure every employee felt heard. It wasn't just about fixing Todd's mess. It was about setting a standard that would last. Of course, changes like this don't happen quietly. Word spread fast. First among the staff, then to the customers. People noticed the difference almost immediately. The food court felt livelier, the stores seemed more welcoming, and even the security guards walked around with a little more pep in their step. One of the younger employees pulled me aside one day and said, "Honestly, it's like a whole new place. People aren't scared to speak up anymore." That hit me in the feels, because really, isn't that what it's all about? To top it all off, I decided to throw a community event to reintroduce the mall under my leadership. It wasn't anything too fancy, just live music, free samples from the food court vendors, and a raffle with some solid prizes. The turnout was insane. Families showed up, kids ran around laughing, and even the moody teens by the fountain seemed less moody than usual. It was the kind of day that reminded me why I'd bought the mall in the first place. But let's talk about Todd for a second. While all this was happening, the guy had gone radio silent. Until one morning, when I opened my inbox to find an email from him. It was long, like novel-length long. He apologized for everything, the favoritism, the public showdown, the general Toddness of it all. He even threw in a bit about how stress had clouded his judgment and how he'd learned so much from the experience. The cherry on top, he begged for a second chance. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe in second chances. But Todd's email didn't read like someone who wanted to make amends. It read like someone who was terrified of being replaced. And frankly, he'd had plenty of chances to get it right. Actions have consequences, and Todd's actions had landed him exactly where he deserved. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer, Vanessa, with a simple note. File this for reference, not hiring him back. As I hit send, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The Todd chapter was officially over, and the mall, it was finally on the right track. The staff was happy, the customers were coming back, and I could walk through the food court without someone yelling about policy violations. This was the new era, and we were just getting started. Months went by, and let me tell you, the mall had done a full 180. Foot traffic was up, the staff seemed genuinely happy, and the customers? They weren't just showing up. They were sticking around, spending money, and even recommending the place to their friends. It felt good, knowing the chaos Todd left behind was officially ancient history. The mall was thriving, and honestly, so was I. But life has a funny way of throwing in little surprises, doesn't it? It was a Saturday afternoon, the food court buzzing with life. Parents juggled trays of pizza and milkshakes, teenagers clustered around the fountain with their iced coffees, and kids zipped between tables like it was some kind of racetrack. I was making my usual rounds, casually checking in with staff and grabbing a pretzel because, let's face it, soft pretzels are basically my kryptonite. That's when I saw him, Todd. At first, I almost didn't recognize him. He was sitting at a corner table, hunched over a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring blankly at his phone. His once perfectly ironed shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, like he'd given up halfway through putting it on. His hair, which used to be slicked back with military precision, was now an unkempt mess. If the Todd I'd known had radiated smug arrogance, this version looked like the poster child for what not to do with your life. For a second, I thought he hadn't noticed me, but then our eyes met. It was brief, just a flicker of recognition, but that was all it took. Todd's face went pale, and in the next moment, he looked away so fast, he might have given himself whiplash. He stared intently at his phone, pretending it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. Spoiler, it definitely wasn't. I couldn't help but smile, not out of malice. Okay, maybe a tiny bit of malice, but mostly because it was such a poetic moment. Here was Todd, the guy who once thought he ruled this mall, reduced to a shadow of his former self, sitting in the very food court where he'd tried to kick me out. Life, man. It's got a sense of humor. I debated whether to go over and say something. A little, "Hey Todd, how's unemployment treating you?" would have been tempting, but I decided against it. He already knew. The way he shrank into his chair, the way he avoided my gaze like it might burn him. Todd didn't need a reminder. He was living it. Instead, I turned back to the pretzel stand, grabbed my snack, and kept walking. As I passed by Todd's table, I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My presence alone was enough. And as I left the food court, a small smile crept onto my face. Sometimes, life doesn't need big speeches or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes, it just hands you a moment so perfectly ironic, you can't help but laugh. Because really, all of this? It started with a hat.